They laughed before she even touched the rifle. A dozen recruits stood under the morning sun at Camp Grayson, squinting as the last one stepped forward. Small frame, quiet steps, hair tied back with military precision. She didn't speak. She didn't smile, just nodded at the instructor and took her place on the line. "Think she can even lift the thing?" someone muttered. The others chuckled. She said nothing. As she leaned forward to check the sight alignment, the hem of her shirt shifted slightly, and for the briefest second, something inked in black curved along her lower back, a coiled serpent wrapped tightly around a single bullet. Up on the ridge, Colonel Rourke froze mid-step, his eyes locked on the mark, his breath caught. He didn't shout, he didn't blink. He just whispered to the sergeant beside him, "That's a black viper mark." What followed next silenced every laugh, rewrote every assumption, and revealed a legacy no one saw coming. Stay with us until the end. You'll never look at the quiet one in the corner the same way again. Let us know in the comments, have you ever misjudged someone too quickly? And don't forget to subscribe for more true cinematic stories just like this. Her name was Sera Lane. 29. Quiet, unassuming, no records of prior deployment, transferred from an administrative unit that didn't exist 2 months ago. At least, that's what her personnel file said. The recruits at Camp Grayson didn't care much for files. What they noticed was that she never spoke unless spoken to, never ate with the others, and never fired a single round during the first 2 weeks of sniper pre-selection. They called her Shadow Lane, Miss Optics, or simply deadweight. Some joked she was just there to pad the diversity stats. Others said she was a plant observer, maybe, for base security. She didn't correct any of them. Every morning, Sera arrived first on the range. She'd clean every rifle meticulously, including those that didn't belong to her. She checked scopes, realigned sights, oiled bolts, and wiped down triggers until they shined like new. No one asked her to. No one thanked her. But when someone's scope drifted off mid-drill or a trigger jammed in the cold, it never happened twice. Still, the mockery persisted. During morning drills, she'd kneel silently on the grass, hands folded behind her back, tracking the wind direction with her eyes, watching tree lines bend and blades of grass tilt. A few recruits found it amusing. "Hey, Lane!" a tall recruit named Reed shouted one day. "You meditating or trying to make the target feel sorry for you?" Laughter rippled through the squad. Sera didn't answer. She simply stood, picked up the rifle left for her on the table, and moved it 2 inches to the left, adjusting the bipod by a single notch. Then she sat back down. Sergeant Trask, the senior instructor, wasn't much kinder. He was old-school infantry, direct, impatient, unimpressed. On the 4th day, he barked across the field. "Lane, you gonna fire that thing today, or are we still learning how to hold it?" She looked up at him without resentment, just steady calm. "I've fired before, Sergeant," she said. "Then what are you waiting for? Divine inspiration?" "No, sir," she replied softly. "I'm just remembering why I stopped." That silenced the group more than anything else had, because it wasn't fear in her voice. It wasn't arrogance either. It was something else, something colder, heavier, something none of them understood. Later that night, Trask found her in the equipment shed, sitting on a crate under a flickering light bulb, disassembling a rifle by touch. No manual, no guidance, just muscle memory. "You don't talk much," he said. "No need," she replied, not looking up. "Most of the others think you're a joke." She nodded. "They should." "Why's that?" "Because when they find out the truth, it'll be easier to forgive themselves for laughing." Trask said nothing after that, just stood there, listening to the sound of a bolt sliding home with surgical precision. From that day on, he watched her a little differently. The others still laughed, but their laughter sounded thinner, because deep down, something about her silence unnerved them. The way she moved like someone who'd carried weight far heavier than a pack. The way she cleaned her weapon like someone who never wanted it to fail, not for her, but for someone else. They didn't know who she was. Not yet. But up on the ridge, Colonel Rourke had already begun to suspect, and his hands, once steady through a dozen operations, had started to tremble. Because he had seen that mark once before. And he remembered what came after. The order came on a Wednesday. Live fire assessment. Each recruit would fire 1 round at a fixed target from 400 meters, One shot, one score. Miss, and you were marked for review. It was a pressure drill designed to simulate the psychological choke point before a critical mission. Sera Lane had not fired a single shot since arriving. And now, she was ordered to go first. The others lined up behind her as she stepped forward, carrying the same rifle she had cleaned and calibrated 100 times for others, but never used herself. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back. She just walked to the firing line with the same calm, unbothered rhythm that had unnerved the squad since day one. Reed leaned toward another recruit and smirked. "This'll be good. Hope someone brought a broom for her ego." A few laughed quietly, almost nervously. As Sera knelt, the wind picked up, rustling her shirt. The back lifted slightly as she adjusted the bipod, and there it was, again etched into her lower back in stark black ink. A serpent coiled around a single bullet. Small letters below it read BV-12. Sergeant Trask furrowed his brow. One of the instructors leaned closer. "Is that a unit tattoo?" Trask opened his mouth to scold her. "This isn't Call of Duty, Lane. Tattoos don't make you a sniper." But before the words left his lips, Colonel Rourke had already descended from the ridge. His boots moved faster than they should have, stopping just a few feet behind her. He stared, then spoke one word, barely above a whisper. "Stop." The instructors turned. Rourke's eyes never left the mark. She was Black Viper. Silence crashed across the range. One of the younger instructors blinked. But Black Viper was, they were all killed. Red line, no survivors. Rourke's jaw clenched. "That's what they told us." Sera looked up slowly, meeting the colonel's gaze for the first time. He stepped forward carefully, like a man approaching an unmarked grave. "What was your call sign?" he asked. "Lane 4, she said quietly. "And how many were in your unit?" 12. He nodded, voice soft. "And how many came back?" Her eyes held steady. "You're looking at her." The words hung like smoke in the wind. No one moved. Even the mocking recruits, Reed included, stood rigid. They didn't understand everything, but they understood enough to feel it. Something enormous had shifted beneath their feet. Colonel Rourke turned to Trask. "Who gave the order for her to shoot first?" No one answered. "I was there," Rourke said. "Hill Kilo 9. She saved me with a shot from almost 900 meters. I never saw her face, just the mark. That snake, that bullet." Sera stood slowly, lowering the rifle. "I didn't save you," she said. "I saved the unit. That was the mission." But even as she said it, something in her tone betrayed the weight she still carried. The memories she'd kept buried beneath silence, repetition, and distance were rising no too loud to ignore. The instructors had taken a step back. Even Trask said nothing. His voice, so often raised, had vanished. Sera turned back to the rifle. One shot still waited in the chamber. She adjusted her stance, not like a trainee anymore, but like a ghost returning to familiar ground. Her eyes locked downrange. "You said I saved you with one shot, Colonel," she said. He nodded slowly. "That's not entirely true." And then, in one smooth motion, she brought the rifle to her shoulder and fired. The target at 400 meters split in half. She stayed in position, finger still near the trigger, gaze unwavering. "I saved you with shot number 473, she said quietly. "The first 472 were practice." Colonel Rourke didn't move. The sound of her shot still echoed faintly across the hills, but what lingered louder was the number she'd just spoken. 476. It wasn't the number of meters. It wasn't the model of the rifle. It was the number of times she had pulled the trigger in one day. "Lane," Rourke said, his voice thin. "What happened on that hill?" The recruits stood frozen behind the firing line, unsure whether to step closer or stay away. No one dared speak. The sun pressed down hard now, but the air had turned cold. Sera remained kneeling beside the rifle, her hands loose at her sides. "You remember it differently," she said to Rourke. He blinked. "I remember being pinned down in a collapsed building, radio dead, bleeding from the scalp. I remember 2 men dead next to me and the others barely breathing. Then I remember silence. The kind of silence that only comes when every threat is gone." Sera nodded slowly. "You were on the 4th floor, northeast corner. You used your sleeve to tie off your head wound. Checked your ammunition 17 times. You had 4 rounds left by the end. Rourke's eyes widened. How could you see all that? She looked at him now not as a subordinate, not as a student, but as someone who had been there. Because I was in the clock tower, 873 meters away, watching you through the scope for 6 hours. Reed, standing furthest in the back, dropped his gaze. Even he could feel it now. This wasn't a tale. This was testimony. There weren't supposed to be more than one hostile, Rourke muttered. There were 17, Sera replied. She closed her eyes briefly, as if each word tasted of rust. They knew you were coming. It wasn't a random contact. It was an ambush, coordinated. They wanted the officers. You were marked. Rourke's face paled. I took out 11 before any of you even knew I was there, she continued. The 12th was the one with his scope trained on your chest when you tried to move toward the window. A long pause. That's the shot you remember. Rourke sat down without realizing he'd moved. His legs just gave out. I read the after-action report, he whispered. Said no Allied snipers were deployed. She gave a tired smile. That's because Black Viper wasn't listed on your roster. We didn't go where others could, we went where others wouldn't. A few of the instructors exchanged glances. They had heard rumors of Black Viper, a unit that operated without patch, name, or credit. Ghosts sent into failed missions to fix what others couldn't. But hearing it now, seeing her made it real. How many did you lose? Trask asked, stepping forward, voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. Sera looked down at her hands. There was a faint tremor there. 12 of us deployed, she said. You were the only survivor? Rourke added, almost reverently. But she shook her head. No. Silence. The tattoo, she said, her voice no longer soft but razor sharp. BV-12. It's not my unit number. It's not a symbol. She looked at Rourke. It's the number of people I couldn't save. The recruits no longer saw a quiet girl polishing rifles. They saw a soldier who'd walked out of a battlefield no one had survived. Someone who had watched through a scope as the people she loved died one by one, while she stayed hidden, breathing, surviving, doing what she had to do. And even now she was still carrying them. The rifle lay beside her, spent casing still smoking faintly in the dirt. No one moved. Not the recruits, not the instructors, not even Colonel Rourke. Because something had changed. Not just in how they looked at Sera Lane, but in how they looked at themselves. She stood, dusted her palms slowly against her fatigues, and turned toward the crowd behind her. Her posture hadn't shifted, but the weight around her had. She was no longer a mystery, no longer a curiosity. She was now something else entirely. Witness, survivor, ghost. One of the younger recruits, Collins, barely 20, spoke, his voice almost cracking. What was it like? Sera glanced at him. What was what like? She asked gently. Black Viper, he said. What was it really like? Her eyes dropped to the earth. Her fingers reached behind her back and absently touched the tattoo. Quiet? It was the first word that came. Then, slowly, she raised her eyes not just to Collins, but to all of them. You want to know what it was like? She said. Her voice didn't rise. If anything, it grew softer, and somehow that quiet drew them all closer. We never shouted, never cheered. We didn't mark kills or collect medals. We didn't have call signs printed on walls or shirts. We didn't take photos. We didn't even speak unless we had to. She took a step forward, into the circle now. We were the ones they sent when the mission was already declared a failure. When the first team didn't come home. When maps turned black and the comms went silent. Her eyes passed over Reed, who looked down again, ashamed. They dropped us in after the stories had already ended, so we could write the last paragraph no one wanted to read. Someone shuffled near the back. Sera continued. And we did it, again and again. Until one day, we didn't all come home. Colonel Rourke stood now, slowly, as if out of respect. Your shot, he said. Today, the one that split the target clean. You said it was number 473. Sera nodded. Rourke blinked, confused. I don't understand. You only fired once. She exhaled, and for the first time, smiled. But it wasn't a happy smile. The day you were trapped on Hill Kilo 9, she said, I watched you for 6 hours. I tracked 17 enemy shooters, accounted for shifting wind from a collapsed roof with no cover, and fired 473 rounds. A stunned silence fell over the group. I had to rotate barrels twice. My spotter died halfway through. I made every shot count because you didn't have backup. You had me. And the final shot? Rourke asked quietly. That was the only one anyone remembered, she said. But they all mattered. Then she turned and faced the firing range again. Downrange, 3 new targets had been set for the next trainee. Sera didn't wait. She picked up the rifle again fast, efficient and without a word, adjusted the scope. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders lowered, not from fatigue, but discipline. And then, crack. The first round hit the forward target center mass, splitting it. Crack. The second round passed through the edge of that same hole and shattered the second target partially obscured behind it. A few gasps. Crack. The third target, barely visible behind brush 300 meters to the left, dropped. Clean. No echo, just a fall. She lowered the rifle and stood up. In Black Viper, she said, turning to the class, we had a saying. They waited. The best shot is the one no one remembers because everyone lived. Rourke's throat tightened. He'd spent years haunted by the silence that followed Hill Kilo 9, never knowing why he'd lived when others didn't. Never knowing who had been out there in the shadows, watching, calculating, saving. Now he did. You shouldn't be here, he said finally. I know, Sera replied. You don't need this training. You never did. I didn't come here to train, she said, her voice almost a whisper again. A pause. I came here to make sure I could still pick up the rifle without hating myself for it. That landed harder than any gunshot. Every instructor, every recruit, every man and woman standing there felt it. Because it wasn't just about hitting a target. It was about the cost of being good at something you never wanted to be known for. A burden no one should carry alone. That evening, the training ground stood unusually quiet. No drills, no running, no shouting across the yard. The recruits had dispersed in hushed pairs. Some wandered the edge of the field in silence, rifles slung low. Others sat in the barracks, staring at the gear they once treated like toys. No one joked. No one dared. Sera Lane stayed behind. She was still at the firing line, alone, sitting on the gravel with her back against the sandbags, elbows resting on her knees, hands open, rifle beside her. Not one person had asked her to explain what she meant by hating herself for picking up the rifle again. But she had known, eventually, the question would come. And it did. From Reed. He approached slowly, awkward in his stance. The same man who once led the laughter now stood as if he were on sacred ground. I didn't get it, he said. Why you stayed quiet all this time? Why you didn't just tell us? Sera didn't look at him. She just watched the treetops sway beyond the range. I didn't stay quiet because I was hiding, she said. Reed nodded once. Okay. I stayed quiet, she continued, because when you've seen what I've seen, you don't talk unless it matters. He hesitated. What did you see? She finally looked at him. And this time, he wished she hadn't. Because in her calm, even gaze was a weight he couldn't name. Not fear, not pain, just something deeper, something hollowed out by time. I saw what happens when people believe the mission matters more than the people, she said. She looked away again, out to the hills. I've taken lives. I've saved lives. And sometimes I'm not sure I know the difference anymore. Reed slowly sat beside her, unsure if he had permission, but too ashamed to walk away. I used to think being a good shot made you a good soldier, he said. Sera gave a faint smile. It makes you useful, not whole. He looked down at his hands. You ever regret joining? She was quiet for a long time before answering. No, she said finally. I regret surviving. Reed looked up at her sharply. I came home with medals I never wore, she said. Names no one could say out loud. But I also came home with 12 faces I see every time I close my eyes. The wind picked up again. It rustled the tall grass, moved dust along the gravel path. The same way it did on the hill, the same way it always did after silence followed violence. I didn't come back here to prove anything, she said. I came to remember. To remember what? He asked. She looked at him, and this time, her voice didn't shake. That picking up a rifle should always be the last choice, never the first. Reed nodded slowly. And for the first time since he'd arrived at Camp Grayson, he felt something deeper than pride. He felt honor, the quiet kind, the heavy kind, the kind she carried. That night, no one saw Sera Lane eat in the mess hall. No one saw her return to the barracks. But the next morning, her cot was neatly made. Her rifle locker was empty. Her nameplate was gone. But on the chalkboard in the center of the training hall, someone had written 7 words in clean, steady script. Remember why you aim before you fire. The recruits found the letter at sunrise. It was folded neatly, placed atop a cloth-wrapped bundle on the center table of the shooting shed. No one had seen who left it, but they didn't need to ask. The bundle contained a pristine M24 rifle, spotless, balanced, weighted perfectly, and a black cloth embroidered only with 2 simple letters stitched in red thread, BV. Beside it was a stack of sealed envelopes, each one labeled by name. One for Reed, one for Collins, one for every recruit in the unit, even Sergeant Trask. No one spoke as they opened theirs. Each letter was different, personalized, specific. Sera Lane had written detailed assessments of their posture, breathing control, sight alignment, timing under pressure, even the micro tremors in their dominant hands. It wasn't criticism. It was precise guidance, quiet mentorship, written by someone who had studied each of them more carefully than they'd ever realized. But what struck them most was what came after the corrections. At the bottom of every letter, in identical handwriting, were the same 7 words. You're better than you think. Prove it. Collins, barely holding his paper steady, looked up at the others. She was teaching us the whole time. Reed nodded, voice low, without saying a word. Sergeant Trask stood nearby, his jaw clenched, reading his own letter over and over. There was no salute in it, no deference, just a sentence that hit harder than a reprimand. You don't need to raise your voice to lead. Sometimes silence teaches louder. In the following days, something shifted across Camp Grayson. Morning drills began with less noise and more focus. The recruits checked their weapons without being told. Reed started showing up early to help clean. Collins stopped joking during live fire sessions. And when new trainees arrived a week later, no one mocked the quiet ones. They knew better now. Colonel Rourke returned on the 3rd day. He walked to the center of the range where the rifle still lay, untouched since Sera left. He didn't touch it. He didn't move it. He simply removed his cap, placed it on the table beside the rifle, and stood in silence for nearly a minute. Sergeant Trask joined him. No words passed between them. After a while, Rourke turned to the recruits. You think she came here to learn, he said, but that's not what happened. No one interrupted. She came here to teach. He paused, letting it land, and we were too stupid to realize it until she was gone. That night, the recruits held their own gathering. No ceremony, no speeches, just a simple photo frame, printed with a black silhouette of a coiled snake around a bullet, placed beside the range wall. At the bottom, a quote. They never shouted, but when they fired, no one forgot. From then on, every class that passed through Camp Grayson heard the same story. Not from official reports or training manuals, but from the instructors who had once laughed and later stood humbled. They'd say nothing at first. Let the new ones scoff at the photo. Let them chuckle at the symbol no one explained. But then they'd hand out a single phrase, 7 words passed down like a whispered code. Remember why you aim before you fire. And eventually, someone would ask the right question. Who was she? And someone would answer, quietly, the one who taught us everything without ever taking credit for any of it. The rifle stayed on the table for weeks. No one dared move it. Not because it was sacred, but because it felt unfinished. As if Sera Lane still lingered just beyond the ridgeline, watching, waiting, letting the wind carry her lessons forward. The recruits never spoke of her like a legend. They didn't have to. Her legacy had already threaded itself into their routines. Before dawn, Reed now arrived an hour early, first to the shed, last to leave. He began leaving small notes in other lockers, reminders to check sight alignment, oil bolts, correct shoulder tension. Quiet echoes of the woman who had once done the same for him. Collins organized silent wind tracking drills. No barking orders, just hand signals and breath work. Even Sergeant Trask changed. His voice still barked when needed, but now he watched more closely, corrected more gently, and listened longer than before. Once, when a new recruit mocked another for cleaning someone else's gear, Trask said just 6 words. The best ones always clean extra rifles. That shut the room up faster than any shouting could. In a corner of the barracks, they built something small, barely the size of a shoebox. Inside, they placed copies of her letters, notes she had written, a clean bolt assembly she had left behind. On top, they set a folded strip of the black cloth, embroidered with red thread, BV-12. But there was no name attached. No plaque. No inscription. That was the point. Her legacy wasn't about recognition. It was about remembrance. One night, Reed sat alone on the edge of the firing range. Stars overhead, rifle across his knees, letter from Sera folded in his breast pocket. Colonel Rourke approached, hands behind his back. She left more behind than most soldiers do in a lifetime, he said. Reed nodded. Why'd she come back? Rourke sighed, staring into the dark. Some ghosts don't want to be seen, he said, but every now and then, they need to make sure the next generation doesn't become like them. She said that, Reed murmured. That we weren't supposed to become her, just better. Rourke smiled faintly. Then you were listening. There was a pause between them, a shared understanding without words. Sir, Reed asked quietly, do you think she'll ever come back? The colonel looked toward the horizon, then shook his head. She doesn't need to. By the end of that cycle, something had changed in the class's reputation. Not louder scores or perfect targets, those came later. What changed was the culture. The way they watched each other's six. The way they valued silence. The way they respected the person at the edge of the group, the one too quiet, too reserved, too careful. Because that was the one who might carry the most weight. That was the one who might save them when everything else fell apart. And though Sera Lane's name never appeared on the official record, her handwriting lived on in every correction note passed between peers. Her words rang in every whispered reminder before live fire. Remember why you aim before you fire. She didn't leave medals behind. She left memory. She left method. She left meaning. A legacy without applause. A legacy without a name. Years passed. Recruits came and went, boots scuffing the same gravel paths, eyes squinting against the same morning sun. Camp Grayson remained what it had always been, a proving ground. A place where youth was tempered by discipline and ego was stripped away by time, repetition, and recoil. But one thing had changed. They no longer mocked the quiet ones. No one laughed at the kid who didn't speak up during chow. No one teased the girl who stayed after class to clean every bolt. No one scoffed when someone asked to observe before firing their first round. Because the story had taken root. Not as a myth but as a memory. Her name was rarely spoken, but her presence never left. Sera Lane. The ghost who came not to train but to remind. At the edge of the range, just beyond the main field, a small black plaque was quietly embedded into a stone. No ceremony marked its placement. No command had it approved. It simply appeared one day. No rank, no name, just 7 words etched in soft metal. Remember why you aim before you fire. It became a ritual. Before every final assessment, each recruit was taken there, not for superstition but for grounding. To be reminded that the rifle in their hands wasn't just a tool for skill, it was a weight, a burden, a memory keeper. And sometimes late in the evening, after the drills had ended and the last echoes faded, 1 or 2 of them would look toward the tree line and wonder if the woman who once knelt there was still watching. Sergeant Trask remained on post for 6 more years. His voice never softened much, but his eyes did. And when a new instructor once barked at a quiet trainee, Trask pulled him aside and pointed toward the plaque. You see that, he said. The younger man nodded. That was placed there for someone who fired 473 rounds in one day to save a team that never saw her face. The instructor blinked. She didn't need to be loud, Trask continued. She just needed to be there. And when she was, no one died. Colonel Rourke retired not long after. At his final debrief, when asked about his proudest moment in service, he didn't mention awards, campaigns, or strategy. He told the story of the day he saw a mark on a young woman's back and realized the past hadn't disappeared, it had returned. Just long enough to make sure the next generation wouldn't forget. And Reed? He became an instructor. The youngest in his unit's history. He didn't shout. He didn't intimidate. but his classes produced some of the most consistent shooters on base. When asked about his method, he said only, "I was taught by someone who didn't want to be known." On the final day of each cycle, he handed out letters to his recruits. Inside each was a personalized note, technique corrections, encouragements, and always at the bottom 7 words, "You're better than you think, prove it." They never found out where Sera Lane went. She disappeared like she arrived quiet, unnoticed, unneeded, until it was too late to realize she'd left. But at every range, every shadowed shed, every whisper between comrades before the first shot, she lived on. Because the most dangerous person in the room was never the loudest. It was always the one sitting quietly in the corner, hands still, eyes clear, praying they'd never have to show you why they were so quiet. Life doesn't always reward the loudest voices. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who say the least, who carry their scars in silence, who keep showing up not to prove anything, but because someone else might need them. Sera Lane's story reminds us that true strength is quiet. It's in the way we listen, the way we watch, the way we do the right thing even when no one sees. She didn't seek recognition. She didn't demand respect. She simply lived a life of purpose, one shaped by loss, discipline, and the quiet hope that the next generation might carry forward what her team never got to finish. And maybe that's the real lesson. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about making others better. So the next time you meet someone who sits quietly in the corner, who works when no one's watching, who doesn't speak unless it matters, pause before you judge. You never know what ghosts they carry, or who they might save when it counts. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us what part stayed with you most. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, quiet stories like this one. Your support helps bring forgotten voices back to life.